All right, good morning, guys. We are going to go over the part of what we're going to be kind of doing for this whole week. So I am going to share my screen with you guys. All right. So what we are going to be working on this week is, once again, we're almost done with our penguin storyline. And we talked last time about hippo, so habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, population growth, and overexploitation. But if you notice, we now have HIPCO, which is the company for hippos, because we've added climate change. So what we're going to be doing, and this is the first assignment that you guys are going to be doing, is talking about the role of zoos in penguin conservation, because nowadays zoos are very, very important for captive breeding programs and learning about behaviors and breeding cycles and patterns in these different organisms. So you are going to learn about what zoos actually do for conservation. Right now, conservation is very, very important because we think that we are basically in our sixth major extinction. So there have been many, many extinctions in the past, but today's are definitely very, very different because we do have empirical evidence that they are being not necessarily caused by humans, but definitely sped up, whereas some species have been caused by humans to become extinct. It's happening at a much, much faster rate than it's ever happened before. And the reason why is because we are eliminating really, really unique ecosystems. So when species become extinct, we have actually three different types of extinction. The first one is local extinction. So in an area, if we extirpate all of the deer and we get rid of deer in an area, deer have gone locally extinct. However, they may still exist somewhere else. The next type of extinction is ecological extinction. This is when the levels of organisms get so low that they don't affect the food web in really any way. So they're not really good for the food web, they're not bad for the food web, they just don't become an important part anymore. The last one is probably what you guys think of when you think of extinctions, which is global extinction. So this is when they are basically no longer found on Earth. So some examples of different birds that have gone extinct down below. The dodo bird is in the middle. We also have the passenger pigeon, great auk, which is the one that looks like a precursor to a penguin. All of these things are no longer with us. So just to review, HIPCO, destruction of habitat, invasive species, pollution, human population growth, climate change, and overexploitation. Habitat loss is one of the main reasons why organisms become extinct or their populations decline. So if we're looking at this map, in the 1600s, elephants were pretty much everywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's everywhere below the Saharan desert. But now they're only in these little pockets. And that's because humans are causing their habitats to become destroyed, and we are encroaching on them with our civilizations. Invasive species can either be introduced to an area on purpose. So sometimes animals are introduced so we can harvest them, so we can grow the different foods, but a lot of time they're introduced accidentally. So one of those are a lot of the beetles that we have, like the emerald ash borer. Those different things came in shipping containers from different countries and got introduced accidentally. Invasive species are really good at taking niches from endemic species. So they outcompete and basically tell the other species that already live there, well, you don't have an ecological job anymore, and I'm taking your job and the job of all of these other organisms. Pollution, really, really big one. We talked a little bit about this with our otter unit, talking about acidification of oceans due to increasing carbon dioxide levels. Another thing that goes along with this is pesticides, which we already talked about, the chemical DDT. We have this phenomena called biological magnification with pollution. So if we put DDT in water, which is a pesticide that gets rid of mosquitoes, every mosquito dies after ingests 1 or 2 molecules of DDT. We have all these dead mosquitoes, and then fish come along, and it's like a golden corral of dead mosquitoes. So when they eat all of those little mosquitoes, they now have maybe 100 or 200 molecules of pesticide. And then an eagle eats 5 birds, and now they have, hundreds and hundreds of molecules of pesticides in them. So it's called biological magnification because the levels of pollutants get higher as we go up that food chain. Urban sprawl in human populations is also one of the ways that we're destroying habitats for organisms. The picture on the left of your screen is a photograph of a subdivision that is basically made in the middle of a desert. So an area that would be otherwise uninhabitable, we are making habitable to humans. We are taking away these really, really delicate habitats that are very, very important. It looks like nothing lives there. There's a lot of things that live in deserts. The picture off to the right is a photo of strip mining in the Amazon rainforest. So those little things that look like little ant tunnels, those are all roads that big trucks will drive on in order to get the minerals out of the ground. So strip mining is extremely detrimental to any ecosystem that it's a part of. We also, of course, have climate change. This is mainly due to air pollutants. So forest fires like that are shown in this page on this page don't really contribute to elevated levels of CO2. There's not enough of them, and they've been happening for hundreds of thousands of years on very repeatable cycles. However, as climates warm, these fires do become slightly more common and it gets rid of habitats. That's why that picture is on there. With this as well, when we are getting rid of these green species, you know that that also helps to increase carbon in the atmosphere because we cannot suck that carbon in through the process of photosynthesis. So it's one of those cycles that if it ebbs and flows correctly, if we have wildfires and then regrowth and wildfires and regrowth, then we're fine. But with increasing temperatures, we're getting blazes that last longer and become more intense. We also have overexploitation of organisms as well. So overharvesting, we're taking way too much from already fragile ecosystems. And one example of this is the fish trawl net that you see down there. And with this, they cannot target a specific species of fish. So if there is a penguin that's swimming around in the water hunting for fish, they're going to get caught in that net and probably drown because they're going to get pulled down and they're not going to be able to surface for air. We also have the issue of unregulated hunting, also known as poaching. In addition, we also have the pet and the zoo trade. So what we talked about last week about macaws and how some kids will, in Central American countries, will go into the cliffs and steal macaw eggs, which is that red, bright, beautiful parrot, and then they'll sell them. Where now there's less in the wild because we're taking these babies from the wild and we're selling them into the pet trade. Other organisms that really, really suffer from this are big cats. So if any of you have watched Tiger King, you've seen some of this exploitation happening for these organisms. There's a lot of abuse that happens, and people get really, really greedy and want more and more of these animals. But then they realize that wild animals are very hard to take care of. So, what you guys are going to do in the first part of your assignment is looking at cause and effect. So you're going to look back at the PowerPoints that you collaboratively made as a class last week and looking at these different factors and try to make cause and effect statements. So I did the first couple for you. So the first one was talking about those fishing nets. So Humboldt penguins can be caught in fishing nets, leading to lower population sizes because we're basically drowning the penguins. Second one, sustainable fishing practices can be used by fishermen, leading to less penguins and other air-breathing marine animals to die in their nets. So I want you guys to look through the PowerPoint that you guys put together as a class and try to figure out some of these statements. And feel free to work with each other on these as well. So if you're like, what PowerPoint? This is the one I'm talking about. So just look in the folder from last class and you guys should be able to go back in and look at that PowerPoint once again. So these are all the different ways that we can harm animals, but how can we help them? So once we notice that there's threatened or endangered species, there's actually 3 main ways that we can help. One of them is habitat restoration. There's many, many organisms, or not organisms, oh my goodness, organizations that I'm actually part of some of them. One of them is Pheasants Forever. A lot of people think that they are strictly a hunting organization, but they're more of a habitat restoration organization to increase grassland habitats for migratory and also game birds to live in. So we can restore their habitats. After we restore those habitats, we need to mitigate. That's preventing future harm to those habitats. Think of it like cleaning your room, okay? Cleaning your room is the restoration, keeping it clean is the mitigation. And we also need preservation. So that's setting aside natural areas where we don't exploit them. We don't log. We often can't hunt in wildlife preserve. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Sometimes humans just aren't allowed to go in them at all unless it's by foot. These are called wilderness areas in the United States. So, some different things that we can do in order to save ecosystems, not only for animals, but also for endangered plant species as well. Where we focus these efforts, we often call geographic hotspots. So you guys have already looked at endemic species. Those are species that only live in one certain area. So hotspots are areas that contain really, really high amounts of these endemic species and also have a high amount of human impact. So if you look at that map down there, in the United States, one of these areas is all along the California coast. Really, really high human population in a lot of those areas, and a really high amount of endemic species that only live in those areas, like in the Sierra Nevada desert and that mountain range that's there. So lots of different areas in the world, pretty much the entire Amazon rainforest, you guys can see there. A lot of areas of Asia, Indonesia, a lot of those rainforest ecosystems have a high amount of species that are very specialized for that one area, but also a high human impact, which is meaning a high human population. One of the ways that we can know that we're helping is by using two different metrics. One of them is called an age structure diagram, and that is shown below in that kind of lavender pink square. So if we are trying to save a monkey, for example, so we're restoring the habitat, we're setting up a captive breeding program where we're releasing monkeys into the wild, all of those things. What we can do to know if we're actually making a difference is sample monkeys. So maybe we release these monkeys, we restore the habitat, we're going to go in 10 years and we're going to try to look at the monkeys that we see. So we might capture them, we might use, they call them camera traps by using trail cameras to take pictures of these animals. So in the first picture where it says rapid growth, if we find a ton of really, really young animals and not a lot of old animals, we know that that population is rapidly growing because there's a lot of babies being made very, very quickly. Okay? More of a slow growth model would be like the United States, where it's a little more even, but we still have the most organisms that are young or in those childbearing ages. So these are for humans. So the childbearing ages would be between 15 and 44. So we have a little bit higher and then less older population. If we go into that population of monkeys and we're seeing zero net growth, that's going to look like the age structure diagram of Spain, Austria, and Greece. So we have pretty even numbers of organisms of all ages. So that means when one dies, one gets born. When one dies, one gets born. If our efforts are not helping, we will see negative growth. So we will see very, very few young or breeding age and a lot of old. So we know that there is something happening that is hindering them from breeding and making new offspring readily. The other graph that we have there is something called kinship data, and you guys are going to be looking at this later on this week. Kin means relatives. So, like your next of kin, like I am my parents' next of kin, I am their closest related relative. We need to make sure, as we talked about last week, that we are not inbreeding these animals. That's one of the reasons why they do genetic tests like the gel electrophoresis and DNA fingerprinting to figure out who parents are, especially for captive breeding programs. So as you can see here, when we're looking at mean kinship and inbreeding and cumulative kinship and inbreeding. So if we look at the circle and the inverted triangle, when the circle goes up, the inverted triangle goes up. Okay, so that means the closer related those species are, the more inbreeding there is. So, same thing with that cumulative kinship. The more organisms that you have that are closely related to each other within your zoo, the more inbreeding you're going to have. So, zoos all over the United States have these crazy breeding programs where a zoo in Germany might have sperm from a bull giraffe, and then the San Diego Zoo in California might have a breeding female, and they will actually like mail the sperm all the way across the world to breed to make sure that they're not closely related to each other. Super, super crazy stuff that we're able to do, but very, very helpful for these captive breeding programs. So I hope that this helped you guys a little bit understand these different things. So get working on your assignments, and I will see you next week.